Hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Eunisses Hernandez. I am one of the co-founders and executive directors of La Defensa. Thank you for joining us this evening. Um, just taking a breath to ground us because we have a very exciting panel, and I'm very excited and honored to be sharing space with some phenomenal people. We're so excited to welcome you to our powerful panel discussion. Bring them home, roses out of the concrete. You may ask, how did that name come about? And there's a lot of history around it. I mean, you can go back all the way even to, the music of Tupac. But for us, we built off of that, and it represents the people that are incarcerated, the people that have been lost to the carceral system, to state-sanctioned violence. You can look on the media, the social media of Justice LA, and see that we've done a Roses Out of the Concrete event outside of the Hall of Injustice, and to really bring light to the people that have been lost and the people that are still inside the LA County jail system and beyond. So once again, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'd like to note that right from the beginning, that we have Spanish interpretation. We have for any Spanish speakers that would like instructions for translation, they're on the screen right now. The slide is up. To activate the translation, go ahead and go to the globe symbol on your Zoom, or the three little menu dots, and you're going to want to click interpretation. You're going to choose the analog that you want to hear. The language that you want to hear. And then that's step 2. And then step 3 is you want to click mute the original language, so you're not hearing the original audio in the interpretation. Y para empezar, antes de que empecemos toda la conversación, quiero introducirme. Buenas noches, buenas tardes. Yo me llamo Eunisses Hernandez. Soy una de las cofundadoras de la organización La Defensa. Muchísimas gracias por estar con nosotros esta noche, esta tarde. Ahorita tenemos una discusión donde yo tengo el súper honor de ser parte de este grupo de conversación. Hay mucho poder en esta conversación que vamos a ir ahorita. El evento se llama Tráigalas a casa, las rosas que nacieron del cemento. Y perdón, se oyen mis perros, pero este evento es para levantar, cuando hablamos como las rosas naciendo del concreto, es para representar a la gente, las familias, los queridas que hemos perdido al sistema de encarcelamiento y del sistema de violencia del Estado, ¿verdad? Pero muchísimas gracias por estar con nosotros hoy y por tener paciencia con mi español. ¿Podemos regresar a la slide, por favor? Si ve aquí, están las instrucciones para el los translation. Si ven su menú en el Zoom o en las otras aplicaciones que está el símbolo del mundo o los 3 puntitos. Si empuja eso, ahí va a salir la opción para activar la interpretación. Ese es el primer paso. Y el segundo paso es de que usted elige el idioma que quiere escuchar. Y el tercer paso, que es opcional, es para no escuchar el audio original. Puede usted poner mute original, que pone el lenguaje o el audio original y lo para que nomás oiga la interpretación. Ahora podemos regresar a la home screen, por favor. Muchísimas gracias. Ahora otra vez, Eunisses Hernandez. Soy la directora ejecutiva de La Defensa. Oh, snap. I got to talk in English. My bad. Let me turn it off real quick. Okay. Now I'm going to introduce myself a little bit more. My name is Eunisses Hernandez again. She, her, hers. I'm a preferred pronouns. I'm the executive director and co-founder of La Defensa, an organizer with the Reimagine LA and the Justice LA coalitions, and a community member that is deeply vested in ending incarceration in LA County. I've had lots of loved ones, the closest of my loved ones impacted by regular jails and prisons, but also immigration jails and prisons. I also have the ultimate pleasure and privilege of being the chair of the LA County Gender Responsive Advisory Committee, a commission where we've been working for over 2 years now to look at how Los Angeles County can end the incarceration of our most vulnerable community members, Black, Indigenous, Latinx community members, as well as transgender, gender nonconforming, intersex community members, and lesbian, gay, bisexual, and queer community members, and community members held pre-trial, community members with mental health needs, that instead of receiving services have ended up in our LA County jail system. For the folks who are being held at CRDF, which is the LA County Women's Jail, the Central Regional Detention Facility in Linwood, where over half the people in there are simply there because they can't pay bail to get out or because of current pretrial policies. Also, for the folks who are transgender, gender nonconforming, LGBTQ+, who are in the K6G units, which are the LGBTQ units in some of the jails. All of these folks that we're bringing up today, we're uplifting, but I just want to put a side note that just because we're uplifting these communities as we need to end the incarceration of them now and today and decarcerate these facilities, that doesn't mean that, other folks such as cis men should not be released. In fact, we do not dichotomize. At the same time, we're trying to close down Men's Central Jail. We're pushing for that and we're advancing that. So it's not that one group is deserving of relief over another. Everybody deserves to be out and all of our communities deserve to be invested in. But these particular communities are what we're going to highlight tonight in this amazing conversation. Tonight's event, Bring Them Home, Rose Out of the Concrete, hosted and produced by La Defensa with partners such as the Young Women's Freedom Center, the TransLatin Coalition, and LA County Supervisorial Districts 1 and 2, will focus on urgent steps that we as community members and as the County of LA must take to decarcerate CRDF and bring our loved ones home back into our communities where they could be better served, reconnected with families, and at a much better cost. We're not wasting money on this. This is an investment rather than the money wasted in incarceration. But there's a lot we can do to bring our loved ones back, and today we're going to get into this conversation. So once again, I just really like to thank you for joining us, and I'm going to give you just a couple more minutes of context because I don't want to leave without giving you this data, some of which I already gave, but just to set the tone. In LA County, between the latest numbers from 2016 show that the top 5 charges for women in LA County are driving without a license or suspended license, are related to poverty, are related to substance use, such as drug possession cases, possession of stolen property cases, or property-related cases. So cases that are really driven by unmet mental health needs, or substance use needs, or even poverty, the lack of income, the lack of opportunity, also has led to a lot of this. But also to take a couple steps back, that in LA County, and even in just incarceration in general, it's not only you're taking away from the economic opportunities of our communities, but you're also just separating families. We saw that recently, under the previous presidential administration, but that has been happening for decades in our local communities as well, by people being taken away into local jail systems. There's a book y'all need to read. It's called City of Inmates by Dr. Hernandez that says mass incarceration is like mass elimination. Really, you're extracting people from our communities in a traumatizing way that gets penetrated in our DNA and even in the experiences of folks who are in community. When we're talking about decarcerating CRDF, we're not just talking about releasing people from cages, though that is urgent and essential, and we're doing that. But it also means that we're talking about investing in mental health services to address the needs in our community members, creating full opportunities for permanent supportive housing. Like enough with shelters, we need permanent supportive housing, permanent places where people can live, creating pretrial services that live within community-based organizations rather than carceral facilities, investing in harm reduction programs. Harm reduction, if you don't know it, Google it, please. But we don't invest enough in harm reduction programs at a time where people are dying, especially in our communities, of unprecedented fentanyl overdoses. We need alternative crisis responses, so you can call other places other than 911 when someone's having a mental health crisis. All of these things that I've mentioned, and including protecting the rights and dignity and safety of our community sex workers, all of those things have been highlighted in the GRAC report as recommendations of what we can do as a county to make sure people are invested in and that they're not criminalized. Ultimately, our abolitionist Care First vision is about reinvesting dollars back into our communities to create the conditions that our people need to thrive. Until we reach this vision, we will continue to fight for the release of those most impacted, even if it becomes No, I'm not going to say even if it becomes, because it's a long journey. So we always have to recognize that, right? The wins will happen tomorrow, but they will happen if we keep pushing forward. I'd now like to turn it over to someone who I admire greatly in this work, and I'm honored and grateful that they're on our team. They helped really lead the putting together this event. And we'll get into uplifting folks later. But Laura is a part of our comms team at La Defensa with Leah and Jess, who also supported, and others. But Leah Cojolan is our communications manager with La Defensa and organizer with White People for Black Lives and the Justice LA and Reimagine LA coalitions. And they will be moderating our conversation this evening. Thank you so much, Laura, and really appreciate you. Take it away. Y'all are going to get it.
Hey, thank you so much, Eunisses. And that was an amazing grounding and context. And it's no surprise because Eunisses has been fighting for over the last decade of her life on these issues. She's a true community leader, a champion of the people. And we're so grateful to have her leadership in this fight, both at La Defensa and also in our broader coalition work. And so thanks, Eunisses, also for introducing me. As Eunisses mentioned, my name is Laura Cojolan. I use they, them pronouns, and I organize with La Defensa, White People for Black Lives, Justice LA, Reimagine LA. And so now I have the distinct pleasure of bringing on our panelists for this very important conversation tonight, Bring Them Home. First, I want to make a note about our structure for the evening. So we have 4 panelists, as many of you've seen in the promotions for the event, and we'll be first starting by taking a moment to talk with each of them individually about an area of their subject matter expertise. And then after that, we'd like for everyone watching our panel tonight to please leave comments and questions in the Zoom chat, in the Facebook chat, and in the YouTube live chat. Our team is collecting those questions as chat monitors and is going to get them back to Eunisses, who at the end is going to moderate a tight, very quick, but still important Q&A. A lot of our panelists have a hard out at 5:55 today. And so to respect everyone's time, we'll aim to have about 8 minutes of Q&A at the end of the conversation. So please throw your questions in the chat. We want to answer them. And now, and we've planned this event for months, so I can't tell you how excited I am that the moment is finally here. I get to introduce a supervisor who I look up to very much, Supervisor Holly Mitchell, who's supervisor of Los Angeles County's 2nd District. Supervisor Mitchell comes to us with a record of already taking on and redressing the harms of incarceration at the legislature, and now is bringing that track record to the board. The supervisor was a champion of Measure J when others were too afraid to champion the measure. And she's also somebody that really lives and breathes centering community and being a partner with community. So we're grateful to have you today. We're also excited because we have Supervisor Solis's office on the call as well. And Supervisor Solis is currently leading as board chair. We're grateful for the leadership. And Supervisor Mitchell will soon be transitioning into the role of board chair. So we're glad that we're in good hands in that regard. And with that, if we have, oh, good, I was wondering if we could see everybody. I can see that we can. And so Supervisor Mitchell, the first question goes out to you. We know that your office has a Care First vision and is prioritizing safely bringing folks back into our communities and getting folks the care that they need outside of carceral settings. And so can you talk about what we need to do now to decarcerate CRDF? And that, for those that are watching and haven't heard that before, is the Century Regional Detention Facility, or the Women's Jail in Linwood.
So good evening, everybody, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this conversation. And I appreciate being included in this panel of true experts. You all have lived and breathed these issues, and I appreciate being included in the space. First of all, I'm exhausted. I'm getting too old. I can't do 5 o'clock midweek panels because I think those of you who know me are expecting vivacious Holly, and you're not going to get vivacious Holly because I'm tired. I'm just tired. I tell the truth. I'm going to try to bring it, but we
appreciate your honesty.
Yeah, it is what it is. There's so much we have to do, and and I'm learning the county, and it's been an interesting year in learning the county. Read into that all you choose. I was proud very recently to support Supervisor Kuehl's motion around the GRAC report and ask for, more data in terms of how we really identify our population and have an honest, frank conversation about decarceration. I was troubled when I realized the number of pregnant women that are currently in the women's county jail, the disproportionate number that were not released as a result of COVID. When we look at brown women and Black women in particular, Black women are serving longer periods of time. And so, misogyny impacts women in jail too. That if you are Black and a woman and in jail, your experience is disproportionate compared to your other female counterparts and certainly to our male counterparts. And so I think the data collection, honoring the GRAF report, honoring those of you who worked in the GRAF report, really is important for us to identify the data, identify the disproportionate experiences women and women of color are having, and that we really dig deep to identify that and come up with solutions. So, since I've joined the board, I've done a number of things, really trying to find consistent, stable funding for ODR as an alternative. Looking at, issues that may not, for some, draw a straight line connecting the issues, but, looking at poverty, recognizing the impact poverty has on women finding themselves systems touched. And so I'm really proud of the work we're going to do around a guaranteed basic income to give women the kind of support they need to make better choices for themselves and for their children. So those are just some of the things that we're doing generally to impact the population. But, this de-incarceration question is an important one that we're going to have to look at for our juveniles, as well as adults, and as well as the women. But, when Sue Burton called me a month or so ago to talk about the number of pregnant women and how she's seen that number balloon, it's deeply troubling. And those are the questions I'm consistently asking about why. Why are Black women there longer? And so the motions around creating a pretrial system are very important. I think fundamentally, it's that none of you nor I can take our foot off the accelerator, that these are issues that we have to continue to lean in on unapologetically. And I hope you know that that's what I'll do, even on days like today when I'm whipped. Because we have to. Because we don't have a choice, right?
Right. And you just said that you were tired and then you brought the fire. So I'm not following the logic, but we're grateful. So with that said, and you touched on it briefly, over half of the people in CRDF are being held there pretrial. Of course, this changes on a given day, but that's the trend that we see in the data. And you did briefly touch on it, but how can we turn pretrial incarceration into pretrial justice, into pretrial services housed in the community?
That's a very good point. And I think first we do it in following the motion that I think it was a Solis Q motion that set up the pretrial work group. I think hopefully that will lead to, independent pretrial services and some kind of agency that talks about funding, that talks about community-based support. And I know these conversations have begun to happen, and I hope they happen quick. One thing I have often been frustrated since being elected for the first time in 2010 is sometimes government can be very slow. And so making sure that there are resources available. And, the community is ready. Government is always, the government doesn't innovate, you all do. And so the best thing government can do is not get in your way and overcomplicate your ability to be the innovators that you are. And so if we can set up a meaningful pretrial services process that includes what to be true and what community needs, and we don't overcomplicate it as sometimes government can, I think that's the best solution. And so again, providing funding and resources and partnerships with community-based organizations is the strategy I hope that the work group comes up with and that we engage in. But clearly it's an issue that has been overlooked for too long. And as you say, when the data shows us that women are there because of the lack of those pretrial services, when you know better, we got to do better. And when we know we have options that are cost effective and more humane, then why in the hell don't we do that? So that's the direction I expect that we'll go in.
Thank you so much. And a piece of context that I forgot to add for our viewers who maybe haven't heard this term of pretrial is that people who are inside pretrial are awaiting their trial. In other words, they're legally innocent. So that's also a nuance that folks oftentimes lose, is that these are not folks that have been convicted of anything, but rather are awaiting a trial and could be doing that back in their home community rather than spending our tax dollars on incarceration. So thank you. Yes, thank you so much for illuminating that issue, Supervisor Mitchell. And like I said earlier, we can't forget, we won't forget your early support and frequent support of Measure J, as well as these issues of decarceration of CRDF. And now I'm excited to introduce...
Laura, can we just add one more thing before you go to the next panelist? In keeping with the point you made, it's not just haven't been gone to trial yet, but the amount of time they spend. I think the average, Jane citizen walking down the street may think, oh, maybe that's a weekend or whatever, but hundreds of days. And so when you think about, I couldn't walk away from my job or my house. And when you think about the impact that has on someone that has not been even had a trial yet, in terms of job abandonment, in terms of, walking away from your housing situation, the unintended, perhaps, consequences that can have on a life that compromises your employment, your housing, all of those things. If anybody just imagine if I just didn't show up for work or didn't pay rent November 1st, like what would happen to my life and my stuff? That's what complicates it for these women, that it could be avoided and it's not, for lack of any kind of pretrial process, and just the unintended consequences it has on your life when you are locked up in this kind of strange period of time. So thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I'm glad you uplifted that, because one of our other panelists has had that exact experience and will be sharing with us. So thank you just for your empathy and sensitivity to that. We really appreciate it. And so, as I was saying, we want to introduce the formidable Michaé de la Cuadra. She joins us from TransLatin Coalition. She has a long history of unpacking and fighting back against the criminalization of queer and trans communities. So your reputation precedes you, Michaé. And we've brought you here today because we know that as we grapple with how we decarcerate queer and trans people, that you can really ground us in this landscape and what this has looked like historically, if you could share.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Super honored to be a part of this panel with such amazing people. Thank you, Supervisor Mitchell. I'll send you the website for the classes. Yes, thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here. And I just want to give like a shout out and gratitude to my ancestors, because without the work of them and the long historic organizing that has happened by my community that is no longer here, I would not even have an opportunity to be here or even be respected to speak on this panel. So I'm very grateful for the long legacy of work that allows me to be here today. There's a long history of criminalization, of policing, of incarceration of trans, gender nonconforming, and intersex people. I think specifically about Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, who are two trans women of color organizers that would house and protect other queer and trans youth, sex workers, and other people that were being targeted by the police and the system at the time. And I think about the Stonewall riots that allowed us to move forward and be in a better place to where we are today. There are other more local fights that have happened, like the Black Cat riots and uprisings. And very specific to LA is this fight against this rule that used to exist that was called Los Angeles City Number 9 rule. A lot of people don't know about this specific rule, but LA City Number 9 rule was a law that basically criminalized trans people by saying that anybody that was wearing more than 3 articles of clothing that didn't align with their sex assigned at birth was basically qualified for arrest. And so a lot of the time, people that are trans, that are just living their lives, being in their truths, were arrested because under the law they were able to be arrested. And so people were often calling them drag queens, cross-dressers, and all of these other like derogatory terms, because we weren't accepted at the time, and we're still not, but it was a lot more terrible back in the day. And so at the time, this law was specifically challenged by a trans woman whose name is Sir Lady Java, who was a drag performer who used to perform at a club called Red Fox on La Cienega here in the city. And so she paired up with the ACLU to challenge this rule, and was able to ultimately get it rescinded and get rid of it. And so now, that law no longer exists. But I think about the impacts of that law and the stigma and discrimination that contributed to our community even nowadays. We may not have an explicit law that criminalizes me for wearing like a dress or wearing heels or wearing clothing that, I wear in a day-to-day, but the long-term impact of that law is still very much felt, and is very much seen by the way that police treat queer and trans people on a day-to-day basis, the way that the everyday person sees a trans person. And this is the history that we don't often talk about. People don't know that this law even ever existed. And our experiences aren't often documented. And I feel that very much carries on into what's happening today too. A lot of the time, we are not talking about the specific experiences of trans people as it relates to police and incarceration, which is a very significant experience. We know that a disproportionate number of people that are incarcerated in places like CRDF and just jails and prisons in general identify as Black, Latinx, Indigenous, but also are queer, trans, gender nonconforming, and intersex. And so there are a ton of community members currently being caged in CRDF. And we know that the county, due to community pressure, has the ability to lower the amount of caged community members to about 1,200 people, because that's what happened in this past year. And so we know that that's possible, but the county has reincarcerated people as COVID, and the bail order and the bail orders have lifted, and the $0 bail orders have lifted. And so right now, there isn't a whole lot of data around how many people are incarcerated in LA County jails, which makes it really difficult to justify, the decarceration of our community. Oftentimes, trans women that are in men's prisons are just seen as men and are counted as men, which is not okay, because they're women and should be counted as women. And so there is a specific unit in Men's Central Jail that's called the K6G unit, which is specifically for LGBTQ people, gay, bisexual, lesbian, and gay, bisexual, and trans people. And in last August, it was estimated that there are about 387 people in that unit. But it is likely that that's a misrepresentation or undercounting of how many people are actually in there. And so there's a lot of work that needs to be done to really document the experiences of our community, because our people are arrested on a daily. The amount of people that come to TransLatin Coalition seeking services straight out of jail, straight out of prison, happens every day, that do not have housing, that do not have access to resources. And, being incarcerated on top of being trans, like having that on your record just like messes with your life even more. And so, having people not have to go through that experience at all is ideal. But now that they're in there, really thinking about the importance of getting them out, which I know I'm going to talk a little bit about later. But that's a little bit about just the history and context of where things are right now.
Michaé, thank you so much for grounding us. And it's deeply troubling and disturbing to really remember, for those of us who've heard those lineages before, or for those that don't know, like you said, to hear the intentional ways that the legal system has criminalized just trans identity, period. So thank you for taking us through that, even as we sit with how heavy and painful it is. And to your point, you talked about the history of trans criminalization and the way that shows up today. And can you talk a little bit more about the conditions that queer and trans folks face when incarcerated? Because we know that there are some pretty unique types of harm that folks experience inside. And also just a moderator transparency moment before I pass it back over to you, Michaé, that we're going to aim to head to Q&A by about 5:47, 5:50. So if our panelists can keep that in mind, that we want to make sure we share all of the stories, and also that we can have a little bit of time for Q&A with folks. And I'll pass it back to you, Michaé.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for the time check. Yeah, in addition to kind of what Eunisses said at the beginning around the reasons that people are getting incarcerated, specifically women, right? For reasons that are related to like poverty and related to other forms of like financial insecurity, like not having updated plates or not having an updated license. Reasons like that are very similar to why trans people are getting incarcerated, you know, because of the stigma and discrimination that people are facing, that our community is facing on a daily basis. A lot of our people don't have access to housing, don't have access to mental health resources, healthcare, can't get jobs because people don't see us as hireable. And so a lot of the time that ends up a lot of our community members end up being poor. The average trans person, from a national study that was conducted in 2015, the average trans person makes under $10,000. And that is not, you know, realistic to survive off of. And so a lot of our community members are living on the streets. And because of that reason, they're often targets for criminalization by the police, because many of our community members have to do sex work as a form of survival, or maybe have to do other forms of engage in other forms of street economies to be able to make income. And so a lot of the time are targeted by the police and are incarcerated for those reasons. And even if people aren't doing sex work, there are people that are well off, financially stable, but, you know, are just walking down the street. And because of the long history of how people have seen our community, will often be profiled as sex workers, even though that's not what we're doing at that moment. And so there's a lot of reasons of why people end up inside. But when people do end up incarcerated, you know, automatically based on our sex assigned at birth, trans people are placed in facilities that don't align with their gender identities. So trans women off the bat, when incarcerated, are put in men's facilities. And because of homophobia, because of transphobia, and because of other reasons like that, are often huge targets of violence, like not only physical violence, but sexual violence, and are put at risk not only by other people that are incarcerated, but by prison and people that work in the jails too, and are treated very poorly because people don't see them as human. And so it's actually like a public health issue and very, very dangerous to be put in a jail as a trans person, because you're already traumatized by the experience of getting incarcerated, but then re-traumatized while you're inside. And so by the time you get out, you know, you're like so like triggered by everything that's happened to you, it makes it difficult to even focus on your survival. And so oftentimes people fall into drug use, fall into other forms of coping, and then end up reincarcerated again and end up in this cycle. And, you know, oftentimes when people get released, they don't have resources to be supported. There aren't a lot of county resources that community members know about, or that are actually competent to be able to support us, which makes organizations like the TransLatin Coalition so important, to be able to build out community-based organizations and resources that are led by us, where people feel safe and comfortable and understand the experiences that people are going through, so that we don't end up in this cycle, and we're able to support people not only financially, but emotionally, and to put a roof on their head, which is the work that we're doing every day. And so if we didn't exist, then what would people have, you know? And that's really scary to think about. And so the county has a responsibility to be able to invest in resources for our community, because then it's just how are we going to move forward if we're not putting, you know, money where our mouth is, and being able to build resources for all people that are impacted by incarceration. And so that's a little bit about the conditions, the reasons, all of the things. But thank you so much for the opportunity to be here, and I'll pass it back to you.
Michaé, thank you. And transparency for everybody watching tonight, that Michaé and I had a conversation before tonight about what might we talk about. And we had no need to do any prep really, because Michaé is just a wealth of knowledge and basically a full textbook on history and policy, and also just a bright light. So we really love you. We appreciate you. We're so grateful for your knowledge drop. and your brilliance. And with that being said, oh, this panel is just so great because everybody on here is so fire. I want to introduce now Angelique Evans. Angelique is another dear partner to La Defensa. She's a lead organizer with the Young Women's Freedom Center. Angelique has been leading the work to decarcerate LGBTQ plus and trans and gender expansive folks, as well as cis women and girls for years. And so brings a wealth of experience also to our panel tonight. And so Angelique, we talked also at length about what we might want to talk about together tonight. Thank you so much for being here. And can you share a little bit about your experience and wisdom in this work, and specifically the need to decarcerate CRDF?
Absolutely. Laura, thank you for the beautiful introduction. And just thank you to all the panelists for your expertise. So in respect of time, I'm going to dig in, and thank you for allowing me to share a part of my story with you. So yeah, again, I'm Angelique. I'm also formerly incarcerated and the mother of 2 boys. And one of which I actually found out I was pregnant while I was in Linwood County Jail. I had my youngest baby, unfortunately, taken from me when he was 3 days old. I was chained to the bed while I was giving birth to my youngest son because I was incarcerated and I was considered a criminal. My older son was placed in foster care and was adopted without my consent or knowledge. Anyone can look you up to see that you are incarcerated, and never once was I contacted to even speak up for my rights as a mother. They talk about family reunification and rehabilitation, but there is no follow-up. There is no rehabilitation, and I am still fighting with CPS over my older son. The system does not reduce harm. It is punitive. It inflicts more trauma than rehabilitation. Trauma is just not inflicted upon the person who is incarcerated, however, but also who are family members, right? Such as my children. CRDF did not create any support for my children or myself for me as a mother. Incarceration period is traumatic enough in itself, but being pregnant while incarcerated is completely dreadful. I didn't even know I was pregnant until I got there. Linwood County Jail refused to tell me the severe medical issues I was having. Let's not forget about my children who had to go their whole lives without me, their mother. The heartbreak of not being able to comfort your own children was torture enough for me, not to mention the punishments and horrible conditions I faced incarcerated in 2009. Male sheriff deputies were consistently harassing us women while we were changing our code. So now I just want you guys to imagine being butt naked, and you're around 60 other women, butt naked, pregnant. And there's men coming in there, violating you. See, at this point, I was not a woman. I was degraded. I was property of the county. And that's exactly how they treated us. And unfortunately, they are still doing that to this day. Different wings will go on, different wings. They have the East Tower and the West Tower will go on lockdown at the same time. Even though there are different LA County Sheriff deputies, different ways, they just always had us on lockdown. Constantly can't use the phone. And this is still happening today because I'm in contact with several folks that are incarcerated in Linwood County Jail. People are segregated based on mental health needs or emotional. So at this point, to get mental health, you have to be violent. You have to really be violent to go. The sad thing is, they did not teach us about the essentials we need, the importance of the email. They didn't even teach us, the importance of the essential things we need, such as a social security card, email, birth certificate, any ID, all those things, no help whatsoever. This left us unprepared to work exactly when we got out. Okay. Being incarcerated is traumatic for women and gender expansive folks. It increases harm and mental health issues. I needed health treatment and support, and instead I was punished. Also, there are a lot of cases of people being prescribed psychiatric medication that are wrong for them. Why are medications prescribed in such high doses that people are incoherent? These medications made people sleep all day and weren't prescribed correctly. Morning meds were prescribed in high doses that are wrong dose for people and sedate folks. These medications are also addictive and stop any steps for folks with substance abuse to actually get clean, such as myself. I was in jail for possession. I did 10 years. What I needed is the same thing we need today. We need help instead of being locked up. What I should have received was at least one offer for a program. Instead, I was not offered programs or support. My children, again, had to grow up without a mother figure because the county would rather invest in my incarceration than my rehabilitation. What I learned from my experiences and what I want you to walk away with is these three things. What we need is more people investing in our rehabilitation rather than incarceration. It wasn't CRDF that helped me to get the support I needed. It was the Young Women's Freedom Center and organizations that provided me with the opportunity. This is why we need to bring home and decarcerate CRDF. All we need is opportunities and support through community-based organizations. The center has contributed to an annual of 79% to 85% reduction recidivism among women and TGNC people who complete our program. Up to 90% of those people who complete our program maintain employment and reach educational goals. This is why we at the center are all in on this work to decarcerate CRDF. We firmly believe in supporting our folks and reuniting families instead of separating families. Now, Laura, that seems like a little bit, that is more rehabilitation and investment looks like, correct?
That's right. Yeah. Thank you, Angelique. You made me like cry, actually, like shed a tear and laugh. And I don't think there are many people that can do that. But in all seriousness, you have been through more than anyone deserves in this lifetime. And the fact that after the life experiences that you've had, you have the courage to actually tell your story to others. It means so much to us. And the fact that you're doing that in service of the movement and of ensuring that what you had to go through never happens to anybody else, it also means so much. So honestly, I can say outside of the space, La Defensa has a chance to organize with Angelique and nobody throws down harder, whether it's flyering for Rate My Judge or on the front lines at an action or at a community event. We won the lottery to be in coalition space with you, and we're so grateful for you. So yeah, let me wipe these tears. But with that being said, as I shared with the group, that we do want to make sure we have time for Q&A because we have some awesome folks on the call, and we want to hear their expertise and get the questions from the group, the audience, I should say. And so I want to turn our attention to our final guest of the evening. Our final guest has been working in the office of LA County Supervisor Hilda Solis, who's a supervisor for the 1st District, as well as the current board chair, very exciting, on implementing a Care First in Jails Last vision for many years. We're excited to be joined by Justice Deputy for Supervisor Hilda Solis, Esther Lim. And so, Esther, your office has been working on a Care First vision from a variety of standpoints, we know, including supporting with co-bottom lining the alternatives to incarceration process, community engagement process and report, and also the recent launch of the infrastructure project, the Care First Villages, which many of our team was lucky enough to be able to attend the launch of. It was really an impactful and special day. And we know that recently the board put forward a motion, the LA County board, I should say, put forward a motion to create the Jail Closure Implementation Team, or the JCIT. We know this body is tasked with ending mass incarceration and closing down jails in LA County. And with that in mind, can you share with us the purpose that the board had in mind when creating that body and what power the body has, especially to decarcerate CRDF, Men's Central Jail, and K6G?
Thanks so much for that, Lauren. I just want to first say, Angelique, thank you so much for sharing your experience. It's really unfortunate that your experience is not a rare one, right? I mean, it's something that's experienced by so many people at CRDF, and some folks may not know, prior to my joining Supervisor Solis as her Justice Deputy, I was also, I worked at the ACLU for almost a decade, monitoring the LA County jails, with special attention on CRDF. So, was inside CRDF, engaging with, with folks inside about conditions, the horrific conditions of confinement. And so it's that experience, that engagement with people who are impacted, directly impacted by incarceration, that fuels, a lot of the policy work that Supervisor Solis leads and supports. So, Angelique, thank you, so much. I mean, honestly, I feel like we can just do a panel with just you talking about, how horrible incarceration is. And, and you're right. The county needs to invest in people's, rehabilitation and support, not in incarceration. And really beyond that, we need to make sure that they're not even touching our system in the first place, right? And that's direct investment in our communities. And I think this is a lot of the work that the supervisor is doing. Folks may not know, she co-authored, the Measure J, now known as Care First Community Investment, that motion to bring that item onto the ballot so that the LA County voters can vote for it. So she's not someone who just says, care first, jails last. She puts a lot of action to it. And, and that kind of carries over into your question, Laura, about JCIT, the jail closure implementation team. So care first, jail last, this is kind of a recent, kind of motto that the board has kind of, really kind of embraced. But this is work, around decarceration that has been going on for years. Like I remember, back in, when I was at the ACLU in 2010, we were talking about closing CJ then. We talked about closing CJ in 2012. We closed about CJ in, 2016. So these are conversations that LA County has continued to have. But what's always been missing is the action, right? We talk, but the action is the part that we need to do. And so there's a really specific reason why JCIT has the word implementation in there, right? This is about, we don't need any more reports, right? We don't need any more studies. We know who needs to get out. We know why people should not be incarcerated. We know that we have to invest more in the community. And Measure J and CFCI is a step to that, right? And part of the reason why JCIT was created was because we had multiple bodies that was, created to look at decarceration and mass incarceration, but none of them were actually given the power to implement. And JCIT was created with a historic mandate. The board gave JCIT this power, this mandate to depopulate Men's Central Jail and demolish it, okay? Demolish, I think, is an important key word here, because if you keep a jail open, right, it's a temptation for people to fill it. And part of decarceration isn't just we release people and then we fill it back up again, right? That's not decarceration. We're just, this is the revolving cycle that we're trying to address here. And so JCIT, with this really historic mandate of not only depopulating and demolishing CJ, there's also another mandate in there, which is no jail construction in LA County, right? I mean, this comes from so much of the work that I remember doing, on the front lines with a lot of the folks, on this call and various coalitions about canceling that $3.5 billion jail project, no Mariloma, for women, right? So all of these things. And so JCIT, with that mandate, right, from the board, is really communicating not only to our county departments, like, hey, the board has taken a position. We don't want CJ. We're going to do all that we can with various motions, with funding to make sure that happens. But it's also, I think, a really solid commitment to the community, to our impacted people, to the people who are currently incarcerated, right? That we're going to get you out. We can't have our jails filled with people who are in there for poverty, for mental health needs, for medical needs, for survival, right? I mean, that was something that Michaé, that you lifted. We have people who are, have no choice. Why? Because we have historically failed to invest in communities for decades, centuries even, right? So JCIT is important in that way. It has that mandate to actually do something so that we can start decarcerating. There's also another key component of JCIT, right? We didn't call it the Men's Central Jail closure implementation plan. We called it a jail closure implementation one. And the reason why is because this is an opportunity for the county to fundamentally address decarceration and the county's dependence on incarcerating people for these kind of issues, right? So if we can fundamentally and foundationally change and address and work towards investing in the community, this isn't just about closing CJ, we can close other jails in our system, right? So that's kind of the importance of JSIT with this historic mandate, and why, the board, why Supervisor Solis with Supervisor Kuehl, put this motion forward, why this motion was, supported, unfortunately, not by the majority of the board, but why it was supported, by the majority of the LA County Board of Supervisors.
Rookie mistake, but it wouldn't be 2020 if I hadn't done it. So here we go. Can y'all hear me? Yes. Okay, great. 2021, I guess now. Esther, thank you so much. And I think what you started off by saying about we don't need more reports. We have the data, community has spoken. We have the stories from community members like Michaé and Angelique who have the leadership, right? Mm-hmm. That's really what we wanted to underscore tonight. So thank you so much for uplifting that. It means a lot. And given that we're at 550, that magic number, we are going to transition to Q&A. But first, again, Esther, we just want to thank Supervisor Solis and your leadership within District 1 on this issue. And we're really grateful and look forward to continuing partnership. And also the wisdom and expertise of all of our panelists, right? I personally am in this work day to day, but feel especially motivated and inspired to redouble down now. And my phone is blowing up. We're obviously zooming in, right? So I'm seeing tons of text messages. I need to get back into this fight. How can we get active? How can we get motivated? So we'll share calls to action because we know that we come together, not just to talk about the issues, but to get things done. And with that in mind, I'm going to pass it back to Eunisses, who's going to moderate our Q&A. And over to you, Eunisses.
Great. Thank you so much, Laura. And thank you so much to our amazing panelists, to Supervisor Mitchell, and to Esther, Supervisor Solis's Justice Deputy, and to definitely uplift, like, one of the reasons why we're here and having this conversation is because people like Supervisor Solis early on was down to throw down and be a champion to cancel contracts that were going to build new jails, and gave community opportunity, both through Measure J, but also through the cancellation of the contracts, to re-envision, to reimagine, to think about something completely new. And so thank you to both of y'all, and Angelique and Michaé, for speaking to y'all's experiences, but also to being experts in what y'all are doing in passing laws and moving money and stopping things from passing. Just thank you. Y'all are incredible. I'm going to now get into the Q&A before we get, before I get more mushy, because I'm really grateful to be with y'all. But the first question, Angelique, let's see. Actually, the second question is for you, Angelique. The first question is for you, Supervisor Mitchell. What steps does the board plan to take to implement recommendations within the GRAC report? And what does the board plan to do to help decarcerate CRDF?
I couldn't find my freaking mouse to get myself unmuted. So, Eunisses, you know that we did the motion last week. I think it was. You spoke to it because it would be completely disrespectful and a waste of group time and group think if you all put all the energy into the GRAC report and it gets set on a shelf and nothing happens to it. And so the motion that came from Kuehl and I was to implement those recommendations. I know there has been some struggle. There have been a number of reports that have happened around closure with recommendations that seem to be, to use an old-fashioned term, ladies in waiting. They're just waiting to be picked up off a shelf and done something with. And so it is certainly my hope that the GRAC report, we are able to roll out the full complement of recommendations that you all come up with. And, the board, it's a new board with myself here, new challenges, presenting new opportunities. I think, with the courts ruling on Measure J, I think the board stepped up and in honoring the wishes of the Measure J Commission. This was my first county budget. Going through that process, making sure that the budgeting process was as transparent as it could be in a time such as this when, it's still, we're not meeting in person. Hopefully, as we move into future years, we can develop a more participatory budget process. From my perspective, this is, one supervisor speaking. to really engage public participation and understanding and input. Not always full agreement. Eunisses, you know, I'll be the first one to tell you, we may not agree all the time, but at least having an opportunity for full community participation, I think, is important. And I think that's the process that we'll be engaging in. I think if we fully implement the GRAC report and your findings, it will get us closer to a date of closure. From my perspective, we must have closure and what are other options and opportunities conversation simultaneously, because a closure conversation and a closure date identified with no real discussion about county capacity and bed capacity and resources is not particularly helpful from my perspective. And so making sure that we do have the community funded, community driven resources and housing and supports available is going to be critical as we talk about closure. We can't put one in front of the other. It has to happen simultaneously.
Thank you so much, Supervisor Mitchell. And exactly what you're saying are the things that we uplift in the ATI report as the prevention, right? Like the things that will keep people out are the things that are also the alternatives to help people get out of this, so we can get people out of the jails. And we know that you have another event this evening, and so you have to hop off at this time. So we're eternally grateful for your leadership, your support, and helping us move this forward, and for your time this evening. Thank you so much. Have a great evening. Thank you. Great. We have a couple of more questions, and we have a few more minutes, so I'm going to line them up real quick. This one is towards Angelique. This one's for you. We're getting questions in through the chat and other places, so that's how I'm uplifting them. But the question is, how do we ensure that alternatives to incarceration are community-based and are led by people who are impacted? And how do we support people who are directly impacted to plug into these spaces in a way that's not tokenizing, but in a way that's nurturing and supportive for that person? And that question is to you, Angelique.
Oh, okay. So I'm sorry. I was on my other one. Can you please repeat that question, Eunisses?
Yeah, no, yes, thank you. It was how do we ensure that alternatives to incarceration are community-based and led by people who are impacted? And how do we support people who are impacted to take those roles in a way that's nurturing for them?
Well, you know, what I love about my job is that we have race and culture, healing and wellness. A lot of folks come, especially is impacted with a lot of trauma. You know what I mean? There's a lot of unsolved trauma, but taking that time to help. Sometimes when I first got out in 2018, I didn't know anything. I was lost. You know what I mean? It took folks to be able to hold my hand, walk me through this, to be able to, know the importance of having an email, getting a job. Inside I was making 9 cents an hour doing hard labor. So when I was coming out and making $15 an hour, I thought I hit the jackpot. I was like, yes, appreciating those things like that. But sometimes we need each other, and we need each other in a way sometimes to walk us through this. You know what I mean? It's very, it's very traumatizing coming home. It is very traumatizing coming home, but to ensure that's why we need to invest more in these organizations such as the center. I'm going to shout out A New Way of Life right now. That's exactly where I came when I went home. You know what I mean? It took folks to be able to invest in me and help me that made me want more. So, I mean, that's just, for me, that's just how I would answer that question right now.
Thank you, Angelique. And Michaé, there's a question in there for you as well. But Angelique, I believe you have a question as well. Do you want to plug that in now? And I'll pass it to Michaé to close.
Okay.
And then Esther?
Yes. Okay, Esther. Hello, Esther. I love you. You was mic dropping it. Okay, so my question to you is, when I was inside, the sheriff's deputies were causing constant harm and sexual violence to people being caged in CRDF. The head of the LA County Sheriff's Department has treated women and femmes in elected office in explicitly misogynist, racist, and harmful ways. What are the ways that the board plans to protect the most vulnerable women, femmes, and gender expansive people that are currently in CRDF?
Thank you so much for that question, Angelique. So first off, I want to say that, when, again, I'm going to refer to a lot of my work at the ACLU because that was my way of, and even now as a justice deputy, I still go inside the jails and engage directly with people who are impacted. We have PREA, we have the Prison Rape Elimination Act, which is a federal law that's supposed to, right? I like to say supposed to protect, those who are vulnerable from harm. We have our Office of Inspector General. So there's a lot of oversight entities over the Sheriff's Department, because as folks may or may not know, right, the sheriff is an elected official, voted in or out by the voters of LA County. So we have oversight entities that help the board to keep people safe, both inside our jails and also out. So we have the Office of Inspector General. They have a team of monitors that also go inside the jails and engage with people who are, incarcerated, have experienced harm, trauma, assault, all sorts. So they're in there. The ACLU Southern California, their jails project is also an opportunity for people to, convey concerns and complaints about their experiences inside the jails. We also have a Civil Brand Commission. So this is, a commission that's been, has been around for a really long time, but it's being reinvigorated so that we can continue to support people who are incarcerated. Because the way that I see it is people who are incarcerated are incredibly vulnerable. The reason why is because, as we know, it's a closed off system, right? People on the streets can't go in there with those cell phone cameras and take photos of all the harm and trauma that people are facing in there versus the streets. So it's incredibly important that we ensure that we can provide as much opportunity for outsiders to go inside the jails to see what's going on. The other component that I forgot to mention about JCIT, the Jail Closure Implementation Team. Another historic mandate that's also in that motion was the inclusion of people who are currently incarcerated. You'll find that a lot of kind of county bodies, we talk about, yes, engaging with people who are formerly incarcerated or people with lived experience or system touched. But with this specific mandate, it was important to me and to Supervisor Solis that we actually engage people who are currently incarcerated and asking them directly, what are some of the services that you needed while you're inside? What are some of the things that you need so that you didn't come inside the jails? What are some services and programs that you need on the outs? This is a way where instead of saying, hey, you come to us to share your concerns or your problems or your solutions, we go directly to them to get that. But part of the protection of people who are incarcerated is both an external and internal. We need to make sure that our external oversight entities are empowered to do the jobs that they can to hear about some of the problems that are inside there, to work on solutions to fix that. But we also need to empower our people who are inside to feel the courage and the bravery to feel supported, to share stories like what you're sharing. A lot of the work that I did at the ACLU, especially around excessive use of force, sexual assault, and so forth, we were so reliant and dependent, and we were partnered and we were allies with people who are incarcerated, because that's how we were able to, how ACLU was able to sue LA County and the LA Sheriff's Department to make massive improvements on use of force policies. And it's only going to be a partnership. So here in the county, the only way that we're going to continue to protect people on the inside is through that partnership. So I want to keep my remarks short, but, we have a lot of oversight entities. I think the Board of Supervisors, really is all about empowering oversight entities and also making sure that people who are inside feel supported and are believed when they tell stories of trauma and harm while they've been incarcerated.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Angelique, for that question. We have 2 more questions. We are a little bit over time, so we're going to go for a couple more minutes. But I'd like to pass this next question to whoever would like to answer it. So I'll go with 2 of them, and then maybe we can do a quick round of last comments. Does that sound good? Okay, great. So we have 2 questions. Can any panelists speak to the experiences of trans, GNC, and intersex youth in camps and probation halls? And then the second question is around Measure R, which is Measure R passed with 73% of the county vote. We said no to the $3.5 billion for new jails. Where is that money? Can we fight for the money for our Care First Measure J? So that's 2 questions, but Michaé, you want to start since we just left off with Esther?
Yeah. For the first question, I mean, trans youth, GNC youth, and intersex youth, are often incarcerated, in their teenage years, because of Like, it's not an uncommon experience to be kicked out of your home. It's honestly kind of rare to have a good experience with your family as a trans person. And I think so many of us, like, I'm very blessed and grateful to have like a really beautiful relationship with my mom, and a lot of people in community like really admire and cherish that, and also see my mom as their mom, because so many times people are kicked out of their homes because of being trans, or giving signs that they are gender nonconforming, and so oftentimes are put on the streets and are incarcerated for the same reasons that adults are, just trying to survive, needing to steal things like food or medicine, and oftentimes that's the part that starts the cycle for them too, is in their younger years, or end up in foster homes, and then end up, just getting stuck in the system in a variety of different ways. And so the treatment of people was just not great either. And so I think a lot of the times it starts for a lot of community members when we're younger. And that's not for everyone, but it definitely does, because of the stigma and discrimination and the ignorance of who we are. People often, even parents, just so will dispose of their children because they're trans or gender nonconforming. So I don't want to say too much, but that's what I would say.
Thank you, Michaé. Does anybody want to tackle the Measure J question? Great. I see you, Esther. Go ahead. Take it away.
Yeah, I'll do it really quick. So, so some of the $3.5 billion jail, I mean, obviously the county didn't have the entire $3.5 billion, right? So we do some of the money that was kind of set aside as almost like a down payment of sorts. That was actually placed in a new fund, which again, Supervisor Solis with co-author Supervisor Kuehl, we created a Care First Jails Last fund. And we specifically put it in this fund because, one, we didn't want other folks tempted to take it to use it for something else. So this money is being set aside for not only the demolition of Men's Central Jail. I look forward to that day when that happens, but also, to build out our system of care, right? I think we recognize that, we need to invest more in the community. And the only way that we're going to do that is making sure that we have that we have safe housing, we have services, we have resources for people who, once they get out, but also ensuring that, people who are on the outs, again, don't touch the system because they have support from the county through their community.
Thank you so much, Esther. And thank you, everyone, for your beautiful answers and questions. We are very much 7 minutes over time, and I want to respect your evenings, both the audience, but also our panelists. Can maybe we just do one quick go round, a couple of words about, what you would hope to see in the near future for femmes, transgender, gender nonconforming, cis women in LA County? Real quick, Angelique, can we start with you?
Absolutely.
Yay.
What I want to see is more rehabilitation investment in our folks. Incarceration is not the answer. Incarceration is not the answer. So we need more investment in rehabilitation for our femmes, gender nonconforming trans folks, our family.
Yeah.
With that.
Thank you. You want to, Michaé, you want to go next?
Michaé,
Yes.
that was our sis.
I was asked this question yesterday too, and what I said was just a future where we can actually think about our future and know that we have options, and not thinking about our future in a way of whether or not we're going to even get there, because so many people don't even live to make it past 35 in our community. And so a future where we can have options and where we know we could thrive. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Michaé. That was beautiful. You want to take us away, Esther? Last one.
Sure. What I foresee for our Two-Spirit, LGBT, trans, our gender expansive community is free and alive. That.
Thank you. Yes, basics. Folks want to be free and alive and thriving. Yes, thank you. So once again, thank you to our amazing panelists, Esther Lim, Justice Deputy with Supervisor Hilda Solis, the amazing, the incomparable Angelique Evans with the Young Women's Freedom Center, the magnificent, just glorious Michaé de la Cuadra with TransLatin Coalition, Laura Colan, the Media and Communications Managers here at La Defensa, Supervisor Mitchell, and also to our translators. Thank you so much for your patience in translating everything tonight. To our tech, Also, I'm trying to pull up the names. Give me 1 second.
I got it. Shout out to Jess Estes, Leah Perez, to Geronimo Saldana, and to Tiffany. We appreciate y'all. Sorry, Eunisses, back to you.
No, thank you. Thank you. And just next steps, this can be found online. But if you want to plug in and take action, like this panel motivated you, there's the Reimagined Space, the Reimagined LA Coalition, which is working on the fund that Esther talked about, which is the Care First Community Investment Fund. There's state work that, Michaé is plugged into at TransLatin Coalition, also the Care First Coalition. There's local work happening with Young Women's Freedom Center, and they're popping off some new political work, which is also very exciting. So follow them online. But again, thank you so much. And thank you for joining us this evening, everyone. Have a great night. Take care.
And a shout out to our amazing host, Eunisses, who's too humble, but we need to give you a huge thank you as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sis, so much.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great evening.